Hey, everybody. Welcome to the IC Topic Chats for today, October 10th, 2024. Claire from Golden Aspen is here today to talk about climate change, climate solutions in your IC firm. I think this is a wonderful topic. I know we think about this a lot. I'm literally recycling stuff, and I take it down to the recycle bin, and I wonder, is it going just into the landfill, or are they doing something with it? There's lots of questions around that, and so I'm thinking about this stuff, and I'm sure Claire's going to go into a lot more thorough topics than that. She reminded me how we have zero carbon emissions or very little carbon emissions with our session today. So I was excited to know that is the case. But with that, Claire, why don't you take it away, and I'll be here to accommodate you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Great to see you all. As Matt mentioned, I'm Claire Stoscheck. I am with Golden Aspen Consulting. We are a firm based in upstate New York, work all over the country, and I'm the founder and lead consultant. And we do program evaluation, strategic planning, and applied research at the intersection of equity and the environment. And today we're talking about climate change and climate solutions and our independent consulting firms. So I'm just going to start with a brief presentation, like 10 minutes, and then we're going to go into more participatory brainstorming together. So just want to start with some basic facts to kind of set the groundwork for the conversation. Just the concept that humans are a part of nature, right? We're not separate from it. We are embedded in it. Our lives are owed to nature, and our economies are owed to nature. The World Bank says that over half of GDP is dependent on nature, but I have a sneaking suspicion it's more than that, just because we are here on planet Earth. Humans cause climate change, and it is real. Fossil fuels companies have actually known about this for quite a while. Evidence has shown that Exxon, for example, was aware as early as 1977, and they have purposely covered it up. You might guess why they would want to do that. Climate change doesn't hurt, quote unquote, the earth, something separate from us. This is a big one. It's hard to wrap our minds around this because we're so used to thinking as humans, we are separate from the earth, but we are very much a part of the whole ecosystem on planet Earth. And so that's important to remember, that it hurts not just something separate from us, but it hurts us. It hurts our children or other children that we know, future generations, and it hurts billions of other animals and plants on the earth. And so, speaking of which, it is very much tied to the biodiversity crisis, and this doesn't necessarily get as much attention as the climate crisis, but we are losing species rapidly. Up to 1 million species are threatened with extinction, many within the next decades. I won't go into all the details, but if you're not familiar with the biodiversity crisis, look it up for sure. It is very important as well. And climate, of course, is fueling that crisis. So contributions to climate changing greenhouse gas emissions have not been equal across the globe. I'm sure many of you are aware. Developed or global north countries historically have far surpassed those of the global south. And additionally, the devastating impacts of climate change disproportionately negatively affect the same people who contributed the least to greenhouse gas emissions. So, folks in the global south hardly contributed at all historically, and now are facing our frontline communities and facing the consequences. So this crisis is a multiplier, and so it makes existing vulnerable people and communities even more vulnerable. So we have to think about all the ripple effects that this has on folks in terms of migration and food systems, et cetera. And therefore, given these facts, I think it's imperative to have a climate justice lens when approaching the crisis. It's not just about those with privilege should become net zero at expense of others. No, we need to think about equity when we approach this and make sure frontline communities are really held up and get the resources they need. I think the biggest fact that not everyone necessarily thinks about or might agree is that we actually can mitigate it or halt it. We caused it. We know how to find a solution. We can definitely stop it. So I will bring that piece of hope to us today. A little bit more on the concept of climate justice. If you're not familiar, I just wanted to give you a few different definitions. Here's one from earth.com. That's a nonprofit. They say that climate justice is a principle that the benefits reaped from activities that cause climate change and the burdens of climate change impacts should be distributed fairly. Climate justice means that countries that became wealthy through unrestricted climate pollution have the greatest responsibility to not only stop warming the planet, but also help other countries adapt to climate change and develop economically with non-polluting technologies. And UNDP says that climate justice means putting equity and human rights at the core of decision-making and action on climate change. Now, these perspectives are more globally between quote unquote the global north and global south, but even within a country, especially one as vast as the United States, there's clearly different communities that have contributed less, but are also being hurt more by the negative consequences that we really have to take into mind as we think about solutions and where to allocate resources. That's related, this lens of climate justice is very much related to the concept of just transition. Again, there's a few different definitions of this. It came historically out of the labor movement saying, hey, if we're going to shut down coal plants, et cetera, we need to bring those workers along into the new economy and not just lay them off and forget about them, right? So from the International Labor Organization, their definition of a just transition is that greening the economy in a way that is fair and inclusive as possible to everyone concerned, creating decent work and opportunities and leaving no one behind. More of a movement building perspective is that a just transition is a framework to build economic and political power to shift from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. So they're really talking about, hey, let's take this advantage of this massive restructuring of the global economy in terms of what is our major fuel source to also restructure it with a justice lens and make sure that we also are using this opportunity to redistribute wealth. So those are the perspectives of where can we go? It's not just about going back in time. We can actually go to a better place in this just transition than we currently have in terms of social justice, in terms of living more in harmony with the earth. All right, so I want to start, now that we have those kind of definitions in, I want to start with my climate story. I've learned several years ago that it's really important to tell your own climate story and just to think about how it's affected you personally in your life, because it's all affected us in some way or another, right? So starting way back then, in 2006, my now husband and I biked over 6,000 miles in the Andes with the goal of learning about bicycle movements and promoting bikes as an alternative form of transportation that does not contribute to climate change like cars do. So basically, we pedaled nonstop over steep mountains. We had huge, heavy bikes loaded with gear, as you can see in the photos. We crossed Andes Mountains like 8 times. And I pedaled with a sign on my bike. It said, biking to mitigate climate change. So we were studying bike cultures, blogging about them, trying to spread the love of bicycles and trying to spread people's love of them as an alternative transportation to car culture and fossil fuels. And we met amazing cyclists who were doing even longer tours, generosity of people all over who took us in and shared their mate with us along the way. We also met farmers who were really worried about the melting glaciers, right? So they were dependent on the glaciers to have their agriculture, and they already were seeing them melting back. And this was almost 2 decades ago, right? And this is due to climate change. We also met people. This picture is where we're at the Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia, in the Altiplano. And way back then, almost 2 decades ago, folks were really concerned about the mining of lithium, because the Salar de Uyuni is actually estimates between 25% and 50%, half of the world's lithium is in the salar. And actually, they haven't started mining it at a big scale until 2023, so last year. But that's just an interesting climate story because the demand for lithium is going up due to technology, but especially because of electric vehicles, which is, one of the solutions to climate change. That is also causing these ripple effects because it will take a lot of water, and that will take water away from farmers who are working with their llama herds and quinoa farmers, etc. So I just want to share that story as an example. This isn't clear cut, black and white. Even solutions have negative consequences we got to think through. and understand that climate change solutions are complex and we should always have a critical mind as we explore them. So that's how my climate journey began many years ago. And now, almost 2 decades later, fast forward, many flights and car miles later, and bike miles, and working as a leader in various nonprofits on environmental and climate justice, including bike organizations, food organizations, etc. Here we are today, 2024. And I'm seeing climate change now. It's not so theoretical, like, oh, the Bolivian farmers I spoke to were talking about the glaciers melting. I'm seeing it with my own eyes in a new way, especially the last 4 years. It's becoming way more real to me. And the people I talk to around me in upstate New York see it too. The rate of change is rapidly increasing. It's much more tangible. Just look at Florida. People are fleeing because they can no longer afford, or there just isn't homeowners insurance anymore. It's just not available. My childhood was vastly different from my children's. I would spend entire days in the woods and never once get a tick. And I've never had Lyme disease. My kids get 10 ticks a year, and my daughter has had Lyme disease twice, and she's 5 years old. So in upstate New York, we're relatively far from most of the extreme weather events so far, like hurricanes and wildfires, but nowhere is safe, right? We're all connected. We all share one atmosphere. And so here you can see the iconic picture of New York City last summer when wildfire smoke turned the skyscraper skyline orange, bright orange. It happened here in Ithaca too. Is very eerie, something we had never experienced before. We've experienced school closures for wildfire smoke. We've experienced school closures for extreme heat because our schools were built in a decade when there were lower temperatures and they don't have adequate cooling. We just purchased a house last week. We are literally right outside the flood zone. The flood zone is expanding, and we just, bought the house, and we're hoping for the best, that the flood zone doesn't further expand, that mitigation can happen, but it probably will. So we're all, starting to experience this in a more intense way, even if we have been historically kind of sheltered from it. So what are our solutions, right? We're starting to see this more. It's affecting our lives more, even if we are living privileged lives in the United States, even though it's been affecting other people for many, many decades. So yeah, I'm no longer biking the Andes. Small children, bills to pay. I'm trying to talk about it. It's a really hard topic. It often shuts people down. It's not something you want to bring to a cocktail party and start chatting about necessarily, because it is psychologically very distressing, right? But I'm really trying to understand, how can we keep talking about it even when it's distressing? I am taking a climate justice lens to my evaluation practice, trying to make individual changes while supporting larger movements, but it's a journey, right? It's a work in progress. I haven't done a lot of the ideas I'll present to you today. I haven't even done, just to be very clear. It's just stuff that I'm interested in doing and want to talk to people and figure out the best strategies. So it's important to remember that none of us are perfect when it comes to living a lifestyle that's greenhouse gas neutral, in harmony with the earth, or promoting climate justice. But just because it's impossible to be quote unquote perfect, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So that's what I've been trying to learn myself, is that it's important to not become paralyzed because of the immensity of the issue, right? Because paralysis means we're just going to go down that road faster. So the more that we can stick to, no, we can do something collectively, that's really important, right? So it takes effort, it takes investment. Some of the things we'll talk about today are pretty easy. It's just choose this bank or that bank. Some might be more, substantial, like, am I going to decide to go to this conference or not? So, it's a lot of decisions. It's a lot of personal decision making, but I'm really excited to be here to discuss with you today, because I think the journey is more easy when we all are in it together and we're brainstorming solutions together. And we're recognizing that we can find climate solutions even within our small independent firms. So I'm going to share some ideas and really, really want it to be interactive and hear yours as well. But first, let's start with, why should climate solutions matter to evaluation practices? Just a few points, and then I want to open it up. So at one point, I think it's pretty obvious that we live on planet Earth and we are humans and we are in this atmosphere that is becoming increasingly chaotic. We tend to work with mission-driven organizations who are working to make the world a better place. So that aligns with the organizations that we work with. And then also we hold some amount of power, right? We have some influence and we have some sway and we talk to lots of people and we have the attention and ears of lots of people. And that's power and that's awesome. And we can use that to further solutions. So yeah, I want to open it up to the floor if you want to put it in the chat or just speak. Why else do you think, climate solutions are, why does it matter to us? Why is this important?
So did you want me to pause right here and we'll do a discussion and then we can go back into some more presentation later?
Sure, if you want.
Okay.
Great. So thank you so much for sharing your individual reasons for why climate change solutions is important for your IC firm. That's really awesome to hear. So next up, so what solutions? We all want to know solutions, right? We know there's a huge problem. What are we going to do about it? So I do want to start the solution section by saying, hey, this is a systemic problem. As much as fossil fuel companies and others may want us to think it's all on us individually because we didn't change enough light bulbs, that's not true. This is, global economies are built on a fuel that is, contributing to climate change. So I just want to make very clear that it's important to realize that a systems problem requires a systems change approach. And first and foremost, it's probably another topic chat to talk about what's the most effective or what are the multiple effective ways to do a systemic approach to climate solutions. Just off the top of my head, advocacy for policies, marching, demonstrating, going to Standing Rock or supporting the indigenous communities there, doing lockdowns, direct action, community organizing. New York State amazingly had success in putting a moratorium on fracking, hydraulic fracking, several years ago, and that was because of massive amounts of rural community organizing. And that's really powerful, right? There are successes here. And voting, of course, right? Dare I say, vote for a politician who believes climate change is real, because if they don't, we're not going to get any progress on it. So I just want to make it really clear when we talk about solutions that by focusing on our procurement and our banking, I'm not saying that that is the only solution, right? I just want to say that it's systems change work. It's complex. It's time consuming. We may not always be able to be at the marches, contributing money, doing sit-ins. We can't necessarily always do that. We're busy with our businesses, taking care of our families, making ends meet. So how can we have one toe in the systems change work or supporting the youth that are doing amazing work around climate justice while also integrating it into our day-to-day businesses, right? So I just want to have that be very clear. It's not individuals' problem, fault, but we can do things at an individual level, at a business level, and have a collective impact while also supporting this systems change work that absolutely has to happen. Okay, so with that said, next up, our major focus for each of these areas of our business is what can we do in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, energy efficiency, so using less energy, climate justice, biodiversity. What can we do in these areas to collectively accelerate climate solutions? And in the meantime, there's a multiplier effect in a positive way. Then we can impact and have influence and inspire others to take action, right? So the multiplier effect happens both ways. It can happen in a positive way. So the areas I want to cover super briefly, and love your comments in the chat to each of these, are on the screen. There's 10 areas, so we're going to run through them real quick. And I'll ask for everyone anything else. What's missing from this list? Put it in the chat, and then we can discuss at the end. So calculating your firm's emissions, institutionalizing values, getting certifications to demonstrate our commitment and our values, physical office space, procurement, how and how much we get around for work, what we eat to fuel our work, how we use technology, as Ashima was mentioning, especially AI, where we bank, what we invest in, how do we address climate crisis in our actual practice with our clients, and then climate communication, because that is key to all of this. Okay, so calculating your firm's emissions. First things first, we're evaluators. We like data. We like to measure change, right? So if you're thinking about how do I take a climate justice lens to my firm, you could think about doing a baseline, right? So you could use this calculator from the EPA. It says it will, I haven't used it yet, but it says that it will determine and direct the direct and indirect emissions from all sources at an organization when the activity data are entered into various sections of a workbook for an annual period. So basically, you could use this to create a baseline for your organization. And then, next year you could check, like, see, how have I advanced in my emissions based on the changes I've made. So put in the chat if you have ideas for other calculators or other ways to kind of measure your advancement on this journey towards climate change solutions. So then there's this idea of institutionalizing your values and getting certificates. And I know that's something that Lisa partially, you covered some of this. Would love to hear your thoughts too. So just a few off the top of my head, if we want to kind of institutionalize it and say, hey, this is our commitment, let's, put it out to the world. There's some options. One, you could become a B corporation, and they're about their third party measuring a company's entire social and environmental impact. Put the link there if you're interested. 1% for the planet is another, where you're making a commitment and then they actually verify to prove that you're actually following up. So you put 1% of your income towards environmental organizations working to support people on the planet, right? So those are just a few examples of how you can say, hey, these are my values. I'm going to put them out to the world and I'm going to be held accountable because I'm going to have this third party actually come and check my books or whatnot and make sure that I'm doing what I'm saying I'm doing and not greenwashing, right? So yeah, put other ideas in the chat for certifications and ways to institutionalize our values. All right, physical office space. This is a big one, right? Probably a lot of us have home offices. Some of us have rentals or other bigger physical spaces. So I'm actually in the process of doing a renovation. So I'm thinking a lot about this and just learning a lot more about insulation. Weather stripping, that means that the little weather strips at the bottom of doors, that can be a big thing. Making sure your space is insulated properly. I've been learning a lot about spray foam, which is actually potentially problematic, but there's lots of other kinds of, like, spray and cellulose is great for renovations, and it doesn't have any off-gassing or further environmental problems. So that is key. Like, we want our building envelopes to be tight so that if we get a mini split or some other electric heating and cooling system, we're keeping our space weatherized. So the next topic is mini splits. That's big, that's hot. They're 3 or 4 times more efficient than other heating and cooling systems. They're amazing. There's IRA subsidies. They work in cold weather. They're called cold weather mini splits. And they, of course, work in hot weather too. So IRA subsidies, the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by the Biden administration. I put a link here to all the credits that you can get. So you can get credits for used or new electric vehicles. You can also get credits for heat pumps. And look into this and what you can qualify for, but also look at the state. So New York State's kind of at the cutting edge. I have to admit, it's been frustrating to manage all the bureaucracy. But your state I would look at your cooperative extension. They'll probably know if additional subsidies in addition to the IRS credits are available to you. Supposedly up to 14,000, but you, at least in New York, you have to currently be on propane or another delivered very expensive fuel to get that. So people on natural gas are not qualified. However, the credits, so this link here, those are, they don't have that stipulation. So if you're thinking, hey, my space needs to have better heating, better cooling, look into these credits. You could really save a lot of money to transition. So again, that all depends on the grid becoming more and more electric, right? So if the grid continues to be run off of fossil fuels, not so great of a net benefit. So we also still need that policy work to continue to push the grid. And there's a lot of technical issues too that I don't know much about that's kind of holding up the grid in some places, but we really need to push for our grids to be electrified from renewable resources, wind, geothermal, etc. And so we need to electrify our buildings. At the same time, we need to push the grid to be renewable. Okay, reducing energy use. I mean, this is kind of a basic one, but yeah, obviously if we use less energy, great. My heat's broken, so I'm doing my part today. I have like several layers on, and it's keeping me very much awake. Hey, LEDs, of course, turning off appliances, using or buying energy efficient appliances when your appliances end their life cycle. Induction stoves are a big thing where they're just super, super efficient. You can like heat up water like that. I'm really excited to try that. So lots of ideas there on how we can actually reduce our energy use in the first place and not have to rely on the grid or fossil fuels. So put your additional ideas in the chat. Procurement, I didn't develop this one as deeply, but basically it's just anything we buy for a business. Paper, software, anything, right? And where are we going to buy it and how does that affect the climate and other people? So just big concepts would be, you know, can we buy locally? That's going to be a lot less miles that is going to have to travel to get to your house. Third-party certifications. How can I make sure that whoever's making this product is paying attention to the climate? Now, I know Amazon has like climate friendly certification happening. I haven't researched it. I don't know how real it is. So that would be interesting if one of you knows more about that. But I mean, in general, Amazon's not local. It's not always supporting local business owners. So pros and cons there, but thinking about what do we buy every year and where are we getting it and what are the effects not only on the climate, but on social justice as well. All right, put your thoughts in the chat on procurement, how and how much we get around. You know, we all have to get around. So we might be doing site visits to collect data, going to conferences to network and share our thoughts, local work travel. So I guess the questions here that you might just want to think about are, is that site visit necessary? Is it necessary for me to go to that site visit across the globe? Could I subcontract a local evaluator, save that flight? Do I need to go to this conference this year? Could I go to the conference every other year? Could I attend virtually? These are the kind of questions that could help us think. You know, when I have to do local work travel, do I have to use a car? Could I use the bus? Could I use a bike? Just thinking about the different ways to get around and then the carbon emissions that are related to that. Transportation is a major source beyond buildings. Buildings is like number one, but transportation is a major source of carbon emissions. All right, put your thoughts on transportation in the chat. So what we eat to fuel our work. Some people might think, what does that have to do with work? But of course, like we use energy to work. So where we get our food and what kind of food systems we're supporting by where we get our food, that's important for climate, right? So eating locally, supporting local food systems, that's really key, not just in the sense that there's much less carbon, right? You're not getting, let's say, I'm in New York. If I get tomatoes from up the road as opposed to California, that's a huge carbon difference, right? But also it's contributing to building and developing a local food system, which is going to be increasingly important. I don't know if you remember back to the early COVID days when supply chains just started to fall apart, right? With more and more climate disruptions happening, vulnerable supply chains are the long ones, right? From Mexico to New York for your tomato. That's a long supply chain that's vulnerable to many different climate disruptions. So, you know, how can you support local food systems to build more sustainably? Because that will also like build in this redundancy and build in this resilience to your local community. Water in California. US gets so many of our produce from California, and water is a huge issue. And so we got to think about how we can build these local food systems that are not as vulnerable. And that includes supporting regenerative ag. So agriculture that actually builds the soil so that it can capture more carbon, so that it, you know, it's forever, shout out to Kamala, Forever Green, one of our clients is working to make sure that we, you know, we don't have vast amounts of cropping lands just completely uncovered in the winter, so that we have green constantly. We're always using that land to capture carbon and store it into the ground instead of runoff. So that's really key as well. And then food waste. Food waste is, I mean, if you start looking into food waste, it's overwhelming. Like I think it's a third. Some of the food folks might have that better memorized, but just an incredible amount of food waste, especially in the US. And how can we, you know, buy less, buy in smaller amounts, make sure we use old produce that looks funky, but it's still good, compost. These are all the ways to reduce, so much energy goes. I talk to my kids all the time, like, you're leaving food there. Think about all the farmers and the people who packed that food and the people who transported that food, the people who cleaned it, the people who, so much energy went into that food. And how can we make sure that we use it to the best ability that we have? All right, put your thoughts on food in the chats. Next is technology. And I find this one really interesting because I know that AI is a huge hot topic. Last year it was at AEA. Everyone's talking about it. And there's some consequences to it when you look into the research, and there's not a lot yet, but it's definitely well documented that AI has negative effects on carbon emissions and water use. It's well documented that training AI systems takes an incredible amount of carbon. So just a few facts here. So OpenAI's ChatGPT-3 emitted more than 500 metric tons of carbon dioxide during training. So for perspective, that's about 600 flights between London and New York. And that was for one model, right? And so many models are being trained constantly. So it's well documented that training it takes a lot of carbon. Well, what about using it? So some research is emerging that Technology Review reported on some research that generating one AI image takes as much energy as fully charging your smartphone. Scientific American admitted that there's still limited data on the carbon footprint of a single generative AI query, but some industry figures estimate it to be 4 to 5 times higher than that of a search engine. So just think about it. Like, how many searches do you do a day? And if you use only AI versus a old school search engine, what's the difference? It could be a difference of 4 to 5 times. So again, more research is needed in this area. Understandably, AI tech doesn't necessarily want to divulge all the details, but it's really important for us to think about this new technology that has all these benefits, but then what are the drawbacks? I didn't put facts here either about water use, but the water use is incredible. To keep the systems cool, they're using vast amounts of water. So I would encourage you all to look a little bit more into AI use and think of this like, when we decide to use it, what are these consequences? I'm really curious about what you said about software downloads. So please put your thoughts in the chat about other technology besides AI and its effects on carbon emissions and water. All right, so this is a really interesting one that's very pertinent because I needed a new bank. So I did a little digging and I put it out to the IC TIG and got some awesome ideas. And I haven't tried any of these banks yet, but these look like some really interesting ones. So, I don't know how to pronounce this one. Amalgamated something bank. They're a B Corp.
Amalgamated.
Thank you. They, they're really, because they're a B Corp, that there's this third-party certification and that they're accountable to. They say they support sustainable organizations, progressive causes, social justice, and there's net zero, powered 100% by renewable. There's Atmos Financial. There's this whole world of fintech that I'm not too familiar with. Maybe one of you knows more. Like, is that safe? Is it sketchy? But it uses 100% of the deposits to build solar energy and nothing else. Self-help credit supports sustainable food systems, environmental causes. Climate First Bank. They claim to be the nation's first climate-focused bank, which I thought was so interesting because you see climate this, climate that, but in the banking world, I haven't seen this yet. They say they're a full-service community bank offering both personal and commercial, and they're really working to promote sustainability and to reverse the climate crisis. So I'm really curious what other banks you all use or are interested in using for your business services. And then I have investment options, and I really didn't put any material here because I am not an expert in this area. So I would love if any of you know about investing in a way that supports climate solutions, please share. So next, how do we address climate crisis in our actual client work and our practices with our clients in the evaluation world? So I guess one way is to think about how programs contribute to climate change, and footprint evaluation has a great kind of model and framework for that. And then also how programs and program constituents are and will be affected by climate change. So that was to what you were saying, Ava, like it affects everyone, right? And so how do we measure that and how do we look into it? Considering the climate vulnerability of different groups could be really interesting to apply to your design phase. So this is a really cool tool I discovered last year. It's called the Climate Vulnerability Index. You can see the link in the slide, and you can like zero in block by block. It goes that deep into all these different layers of factors that make people vulnerable or less vulnerable to climate, including health, socioeconomic, infrastructure, et cetera. It's very like systemic thinking, and it's a map. And so I think that can be a really cool tool. Asking client questions, right? Like that's one of our strengths. What line of questioning can we use to help our clients think about, what effects might my program have on contributing to climate change, chaos, or contributing to climate solutions? And there's, I'd love to talk sometime with all of you about what are some questions that we might want to ask in our design phases to get our clients to think about that. And then related to that is also, advocating to get a climate change indicator or two in the evaluation plan, right? So what measures is what happens. So the more that we can say, hey, I think you should, include this indicator about such and such, climate vulnerability or how adaptable our community is, et cetera, the more that will then get measured, it'll get reported on, it will get thought about, it'll get discussed, right? So we really, by including indicators, we can really start these discussions and have more progress and more people talking about it. So I put some resources that I found, frameworks, on the next slide. These are ideas or frameworks on applying a climate justice change solutions lens to our evaluation practices. So if you haven't heard of footprint evaluation, look into that. There's, of course, Michael Quinn Patton's Blue Marble evaluation. There's climate change assessments. Better evaluation has some cool participatory tools to help assess climate change impacts and explore adaptation. There's a link here for an environmental footprint calculator. That's from Footprint Evaluation. And then this idea that we've been kind of discussing about a type of evaluation that takes environmental and climate related extreme weather impacts, takes into account those impacts on non-environmental programs. I think in the evaluation world, there's very much this like divide, like it's social programs and then there's environmental programs, and that's like conservation and biodiversity, and they're separate. I'm interested in how can we have a framework that's more integrative and helps clients who are working on very much social people focused programs to also think about, like Ava was mentioning, like how are extreme weather impacts going to affect my constituents and my program participants, because it will and is impacting everyone. So how can we include that into our frameworks, into our design? So I've been thinking about that for many months. Anyone want to reach out and explore more with me? I think that's a framework that is yet to be developed, but I think it could be really helpful. Okay, we are almost done here, and we can open it up to chat. Communication. So I'm going to end with communication because this is super key. So as I mentioned before, a big reason climate change is not talked about enough is due to psychological barriers, because it is so distressful. It is really causes big emotions. And so I think the tendency is many of us to shut it out because we don't want to feel that pain. But there's a lot of research about this, and therefore tools that we can use as evaluators. So I just wanted to introduce to you a couple of frameworks for how to communicate about climate. So one is called the 5 Ds of climate communication. It's distance, so making climate change feel relevant and immediate and not distant. Doom, avoiding overwhelming negative messaging. Dissidence, addressing conflicting beliefs. And denial, recognizing and working with resistance. And finally, identity, aligning climate action with people's values and their identities. There's another one called the 6 Americas framework, developed by Yale. And that basically divides the US population into categories based on their beliefs and attitudes towards climate: alarmed, concerned, cautious, disengaged, doubtful, and dismissive. So it's kind of that community organizing framework of, okay, how can we move folks who are alarmed or are dismissive to doubtful, and then move them to disengaged, and keep moving them up the spectrum until they're in a place where they can take action. because I think it can be paralyzing on both ends. If you're in denial, you don't do anything. If you're overwhelmed, you don't do anything. We need to find a place in the middle so we can take action. And then finally, the climate change communication wheel. It's about establishing common ground, simplifying the message, which is difficult, make it locally relevant, and use trusted messengers and practical solutions. All right, I know that was a ton of info, so it's recorded, so you can check back anytime. If you want to talk more, reach out to me, Claire at goldenaspenconsulting.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love to see more climate-related presentations at future AEAs. I will not be there this year, but maybe next year, we'll see, and would just love to continue this conversation. So with that, let's stop the recording and open up the
All
conversation.
right. Thanks, everybody in YouTube world. We'll see you later. Everybody else, stick around.